A very good morning to all the esteemed professors and learned members of the IEEE, respected HODs, faculty members, and my fellow mates. I, Harneet Narula, of BTech in Electrical and Electronics 7th semester, welcome you all to the first lecture of the Technical Lecture Series organized from 18th September 2021 to 26th September 2021 by the IEEE Student Branch of Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow campus under the supervised guidance of Dr. Kamlesh Kumar Singh Sir, Assistant Professor and Student Branch Counselor, IEEE, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow campus, in collaboration with IEEE Young Professionals Committee UP section and IEEE BTKITS SBC's Dwarhat. This technical lecture series is being supported by IEEE Region 10 and IEEE Young Professionals Region 10. We also have with us Dr. Varun Kakar Sir, Chair IEEE Young Professionals UP section. The lecture titled Machine Learning for Brain-Machine Interface Systems will be taken by Dr. Sumit Soman Sir, Senior Data Scientist and Global AI Accelerator, Ericsson. So, with your permission and the permission of the chair members, may I begin?
Yeah, you can begin.
Thank you, sir. A very good to Dr. Varun Kakkar, Chair IEEE Young Professionals Committee UP Section, Dr. Sumit Soman, Senior Member IEEE Member ACM, Editor IETE Journal of Research, respected HODs, faculty members, and my fellow mates. On behalf of the IEEE Student Branch at Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow campus, I, Harneet Narula, of BTech in Electrical and Electronics 7th semester, welcome you all to the technical lecture series organized under the supervised guidance of Dr. K.K. Singh Sir, Assistant Professor and Student Branch Counselor of IEEE Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow campus, supported by IEEE Region 10 and IEEE Young Professionals Region 10. May I now request Dr. K.K. Singh Sir to please address our audience and welcome our esteemed guests.
Thank you, Harneet. Good morning to one and all present over here. I, Dr. K.K. Singh, on the behalf of IEEE Student Branch at AUP Lucknow campus, welcome all the guests and dignitaries to this technical lecture series. And this is the first lecture which we are going to start today. It will be taken by Dr. Sumit Soman, who is PhD from IIT Delhi and has a vast experience in the field of machine learning. I welcome you, Dr. Sumit. I also welcome my teammates from Young Professional UP section, and a special welcome to Dr. Varun Kakkar for sparing his time and joining us to this event. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I would also like to welcome all the faculty members, especially from ESSEC Lucknow, faculty members from the different colleges of Lucknow and abroad, from BBT, Professor Rafiq, and I can see a few more names from the IEEE site also. So I welcome you all to this technical lecture series. And now I will request Professor Varun Kakar to lead this lecture series. Over to you, Professor Varun.
Thank you, Dr. Kamlesh. And thank you, Dr. Sumit sir. A very warm good morning to all of the participant and expert speaker. I am very thankful to Dr. Kamlesh Kumar Singh from MIT University who took this initiative and pain to organize this technical and professional lecture series, supported by IEEE Region 10 and IEEE Young Professionals Region 10 and IEEE UP section. I am also very much thankful to other Young Professionals Committee team members, Dr. Sumit Tiwari, Dr. Rakesh Yadav, and Dr. Ahmed Faiz Minai. I am also very much thankful to Dr. Sumit Soman, who took time from his busy schedule for this expert lecture series on machine learning methods for brain-machine interface system. I would also like to inform you that Dr. Sumit Soman is also the recipient of the Young Professionals Star of the Month Award from IEEE UP section. I once again thank Dr. Sumit Soman that he took the time from his busy schedule for this lecture. Actually, the Young Professionals Committee from IEEE UP section submitted its proposal to IEEE Young Professionals Region 10 and IEEE Region 10 to conduct various seminars and webinars inviting senior eminent speakers from the industry and academia. I am very much thankful to IEEE Region 10 and IEEE Young Professionals Region 10 for approving our proposal. The IEEE Region 10 approved the proposal, and this webinar or seminar is one of the expert talks which are supported by the IEEE Region 10. I am also very much thankful to IEEE UP section, especially its chairman, Dr. Satish Kumar Singh from IIIT Allahabad, who continuously motivate and guide us from time to time. He is certainly a source of motivation not only for me, but also for the whole Young Professionals Committee and also for the IEEE UP section. I hope today's lecture will surely benefit the students, researchers, participants, and other machine learning enthusiastic people who are currently working or plan to work in this area. As all of you know that, as a lecture is incomplete without a doubt clearing session and question and answer. So this event is also an opportunity for those who are working in this area or plan to work in this area to clear their doubts from the expert speaker who works on the real-time problem. So I once again thank Dr. Kamlesh, Dr. Sumit Soman. Thank you. That's all from my side. Over to you, Dr. Kamlesh sir.
Thank you, Dr. Varun. Now I will request Harneet to please take up this.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest. Dr. Sumit Soman sir holds a PhD in machine learning from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and is currently a senior data scientist with Ericsson. Prior to this, Sir was with the Health Informatics Group at the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, Noida. Sir's research interests include machine learning, 5G, brain-computer interfaces, and health informatics. Sir was awarded the Director General CDAC Young Innovator Award in 2019 and is a senior member of the IEEE, member of the ACM, and an editor of the IETE Journal of Research. May I now request Sir to address us with his lecture on machine learning methods for brain-machine interface systems. Sir, could you please?
Thank you, Harneet, and thanks Dr. Kamlesh and Dr. Varun for giving me this opportunity to present my work to you. Let me begin by sharing my screen, and perhaps one of you could confirm if that is visible. So I hope you are able to see my presentation screen.
Yes, sir, it is visible clearly. Please play in the screen mode, full screen mode, please.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I hope you're good now. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. So this talk, we are largely going to discuss work around machine learning approaches for biosignals. The work that I'm going to present has largely been part of my PhD and some of the work that I was involved with while being at CDAC. This is a talk that covers multiple aspects of building systems with biosignals. So we will be looking at two kinds of systems that we built using different biosignals, and we will be discussing the challenges that we faced and how we came up with signal processing and machine learning methods to build these systems. Thanks. I have been already introduced, so I will just briefly mention that I am currently associated with Ericsson, and prior to this, I was associated with CDAC, and this work is largely around the work that I have done at CDAC and my PhD at IIT Delhi. So to introduce the problem and what we'll be covering in this talk, primarily we are looking at biosignals. Biosignals include a lot of signals that are acquired from various activities or motions that are initiated from the human body. In this case, we are looking at two specific kinds of biosignals, which include signals from the brain and signals from the muscles. So we'll be looking at brain-computer interfaces which are built on signals from the brain, and we'll be looking at some signals from muscular activity, which is called as electromyogram, and we'll be looking at how we build systems using surface electromyogram. So when we work with these signals, there are a lot of challenges that we face. So we will be discussing some of them along with the methods that we can use to alleviate these challenges in the signal processing and machine learning pipeline. These we look at for both electroencephalogram signals, which are brain signals, as well as signals from the muscles, so surface electromyogram. And finally, I'll talk about some of the work that is ongoing currently in the research community, as well as in IEEE for this domain of brain-computer interfaces or brain-machine interfaces, which include some of the standardization efforts that are ongoing. So without further ado, I'll start with the topic and we'll look at what are biosignals and brain-computer interfaces. So this slide, if you see, has different sets of biosignals that we talk about commonly. And if you look at this diagram on the top right, you will see that there are different kinds of biosignals that are available. And this diagram tries to classify these on the basis of the space resolution and the time resolution. So primarily from the space resolution, what it means is that these signals that we look at, so signals for the brain, for example, are generated due to firing of a population of neurons inside the brain. And we typically acquire these signals at a distance away from the brain. So one of the most high resolution methods of acquiring such signals is if we implant these electrodes inside the brain. So for example, if you go to local field potentials or high resolution signals that are achieved by cortical implants, those are high space resolution or fine resolution in space, and higher resolution in time as well, because you are capturing these signals closer to the source of their acquisition. But you would commonly realize that in such systems, it is difficult to do this for day-to-day applications because you cannot always go and implant a device inside a person's brain. So you would generally look at approaches that do not involve medical surgeries or medical procedures. So you would look at non-invasive approaches that are shown on the left part of this graph. So one of the most common ways that is used, and it is also cost effective, is electroencephalogram or EEG signals, where you wear a kind of a headband or a device on your scalp, and the electrodes on this device will collect the signals. So this is one modality which is very common and has been used for various applications, not only clinical, but also other commercial applications. And this is where the domain of interest on brain-computer interfaces or brain-machine interfaces that we are going to talk about in this talk lies. So other than EEG, there are different modalities. There is fMRI, there is magnetoencephalogram, but we will not be looking at these in this specific talk. Of course, there are systems that are being developed on fMRI nowadays, and so on newer technologies that are not invasive but will give better resolution. So we'll primarily be looking at systems that have been built by electroencephalogram. And in the second part of the talk, I'll talk about a system which has been built on electromyogram. So these are activity from the muscles that are shown here. So for example, patients who have been paralyzed or do not have activity in the limbs, you collect signals from the surface of the muscular activity. So these are surface electromyogram signals, and you build a processing pipeline around these signals to control devices such as prosthetic limbs. Now, how this pipeline typically works is that, as you have seen by now and understood probably, that we'll be acquiring these signals from the brain, and these are time series signals that are acquired using digital sensors. So this time series data is available to you for further processing, and you typically tend to build a feature extraction and a translation or a machine learning algorithm to be able to detect the intent of the user from the signals. So for example, if the user is trying to blink, or if he is trying to clench a jaw, or he's trying to imagine some movement, for example, you will try to process these signals and then detect what the user is doing. So for this, you will employ a feature extraction or feature selection method and a machine learning or classification method to detect the intent from the signals. And using this detected intent, you can control devices. So for example, you may want to control the movement of a mouse on a desktop environment, or you may want to control the movement of a wheelchair. So there can be various applications that you can work on in the end user's actuation space. So what we are looking at primarily is this part of the pipeline, where you are acquiring the signals and processing them, and then building a classifier pipeline to identify the user intent. So moving on, we look at EEG signal classification using classifiability and twin support vector machines. So this is one of the work that we had published in Applied Soft Computing, and this has been widely cited as well. So I'll try to look into the problem that we were trying to address, and also try to motivate the approach that we followed and how it resulted in an improvement in the systems. So at this point, I will just take a brief pause and try and show you a video to motivate what we are trying to do here, so that the context of the application will become clear. So I hope you are able to see this video. And so this is a device that we have for acquiring this kind of brain signals. And what I'm trying to do here is that I have an interface, which is a paint application open on this computer, and I'll be trying to use various gestures to draw lines or a kind of an image on the paintbrush screen. So let me just play this. So if you see here, what I'm doing is that this signal is being collected by this device wirelessly. It is connected via Bluetooth to the laptop. And I am trying to do various gestures to create an image or create an object using the paintbrush cursor. So for example, when I blink, the mouse moves up. When I was clenching, the mouse moved left. So now I'm clenching my jaw, it is going towards the right. So the kind of signals that we get from this device, we would like to process them and try to do some actuation on the front end. So this is an example where I'm trying to control this device using EEG signals. So this is what we are trying to do at a high level, and depending on the kind of interface that we want to build, we will be looking at various applications or various processing pipeline steps that we need for this. So I hope I am showing my presentation back again. And we'll first look at the challenges that we face when we are trying to build these approaches. So what I was showing you now is the first step of that aspect is collecting the EEG data or collecting the electroencephalogram data. So here we have a map which is called as the 1020 placement system on the scalp, where you have electrodes placed in various regions of the brain. So this is a standard map where you, according to the region of the brain, you can position electrodes. So for example, there is a frontal region which is responsible for movements of the eye, movements of your jaws, and the frontal region movements. So if you want to capture EEG data for that kind of movement, you would place some electrodes in the frontal regions. So whatever it starts with F here is the frontal region. Is there a question? Okay. So if we want to collect some activity which is in the cortical region, for example, on the motor cortex, if we want to collect some activity, there are these electrodes in the C band or the C region of the brain, cortical region. And for example, if we want to collect data for some imagined movements or some muscular movements, these are typically reflected in the cortex or the motor cortex. So in that case, we will acquire electrodes from the cortical region. Then there is the parietal lobe or the back part of the brain, which is also responsible for some activities which are related to event potentials. So for example, if you look at P300 signals and various other modalities, you look at signals in the parietal lobe. Then there is the occipital lobe, which is responsible for occipital or eye-related movement. So if, for example, you close your eyes, then you will find that there is a rhythm which is very clearly reflected in the occipital regions. And finally, there is a temporal region or the T regions from where you can also collect signals. So this standard map is how electrodes are placed on the scalp, and various devices that you may use. For example, the one that I was trying to show in the video will follow this map or this placement pattern on the scalp. So you may use different number of electrodes, and accordingly you have EEG data from n number of channels. So as many electrodes as you use, those many number of channels you have in the data. It is being sampled at some sampling rate. So let us say m samples per second. Typically, if you want good resolution EEG, you may look at 128 or 256 Hertz. But of course, portable devices may have lower sampling rate. You acquire this data for t seconds. So every time that you acquire EEG data, you have a matrix of size n cross m cross t to work with. So it is a time series data, and the dimensionality of that data is typically the number of samples times the number of channels times the duration that you are collecting it for. So this is how EEG data would typically look like. So this kind of image that is shown here, it corresponds to a time window, different number of channels, and every time window you are acquiring some number of samples, which is equivalent to the sampling rate of the device. Now, what are the challenges that we face? We may face challenges such as spatial blurring. So, for example, when we acquire these signals from the scalp, these are generated at the inside the motor cortex or inside the brain by firing of neurons. And when we are acquiring them at the scalp, the data will be blurred because of the dense dura matter and the skull of the brain, because the signal has to travel through the skull and the dura to reach your acquisition device sensors. So accordingly, there will be blurring in the signals, and therefore the signal that you get is not the best resolution or the best fidelity, and it may be corrupted by various artifacts. So for example, there may be supply lines interference, there may be muscular artifacts, there may be physical movements of the users. So these kind of artifacts would also tend to corrupt the data, and therefore there is non-stationarity and noisiness in the data that you acquire. And another aspect here is that brain-computer interface signals, specifically EEG signals, are low-frequency signals. So typically they lie in the frequency band of less than 50 Hertz. That 50 Hertz band is also higher rhythm. So typically it will start with an alpha band at 4 Hertz, 4 to 8 Hertz as a lower frequency Hertz. And motor movements, for example, would lie between 8 to 30 Hertz or 8 to 12 and 12 to 30, which is the beta bands, first to say. And accordingly, different low frequency bands you may need to isolate and work with. So these challenges are from the signal processing point of perspective when we are working with EEG signals. Now, other than the fact that the signals are non-stationary and there is noise in them, there is also a lot of variability in these signals. So what we are trying to show here in this plot is that if we try to acquire EEG signals for movements of the hand, so for example, we try for movements of the left hand and the right hand, and these are imaginary movements in the sense that you are not physically moving your hand, but you are trying to imagine that you will be moving your hand, because this diagram was specifically for the context where we are working with patients who have physical disabilities. So they do not have the limbs to perform the actual movement, but they are trying to imagine that movement, and accordingly there is activation in the motor cortex. So this image that you see is basically the power spectrum of the EEG signals. You will compute this and project it onto a two-dimensional surface that is mapped by the electrodes of the device. And accordingly, you will plot the power spectrum values over a color range, and this is what you will get. So the blue region is where there is deactivation, and the red part is where there is activation of neurons. That is how we interpret these plots. So what should ideally happen is when you are imagining a movement of the left hand, there should be activation in the right part of your brain. And if you are imagining movement of the right hand, there should be activation on the left part of your brain. That is what is called as event-related desynchronization. And that is the basis of all these motor imagery kind of systems that are developed. So the challenge here is that it is not usually so. When you work with actual data, when you work with patients, and you try to plot these kind of maps, this activation may be very different. You will see that in some patients, some other region is being activated. or some other region is being deactivated. Therefore, what happens is that this variability for various instances of the movement. So each plot is every time the user imagines a movement of the hand, and there is variation in this. So it is not a very direct problem to work with. For example, if you just say I threshold the power spectrum on this region channels and try to detect it, it will not probably work for all users because their activation patterns may vary. So therefore, this is what motivates the need for a machine learning and signal processing kind of pipeline, so that you can isolate the areas of activation for that specific user and then build the pipeline accordingly. So we need to address this variability in the pipeline that we are building. So we need to be catering to high variability across subjects. So across subjects means different users. Across sessions. So for example, the same user may try to do one set of movements in the morning and one set of movements in the evening when you are collecting your training data, for example. And accordingly, you will have different sessions and there will be variability in the sessions and there will be variability in the trials as well. Trial means multiple trials are done in one session. So if I do one recording session and I ask the subject or the user to do 10 times imagine the movement of the left hand, there will be 10 trials. So there may be variability in these 10 individual trials as well. And in terms of multi-class classification, you will see that we need to classify n events, right? For example, in this case, you may want to classify left hand movement, right hand movement, and when the subject is in rest or not doing anything. So there are 3 classes of interest. Accordingly, you may add more classes. For example, in the video that I was showing you, I had four classes. So rest, the jaw clench, the movement of the eye, and the twitching. So those were the 4 intents that I wanted to recognize in that pipeline. So accordingly, I would need to train multiple classifiers. For example, if I'm running a 1 versus rest scenario, and there might be bias towards the majority class samples. So what I mean here is that it is not likely that all the intents will be uniformly available in the data set, right? You may have, say, fewer times the subject moving the left hand and a large number of samples where the subject is only in rest, he is not doing anything. So there is imbalance in this data and you need to build a pipeline which is robust to classification in the presence of imbalances. So in the last 2 slides, we summarized what are the challenges that we face when working with EEG data and what kind of a pipeline we should build is what we will now be looking at. So the typical pipeline looks like this. You have your acquisition signals. You will pre-process the signals to identify a frequency band of interest. You would need to remove artifacts and you would need to extract epochs. Epoch extraction essentially means identifying the time window in which you want to look at the signals. Artifact removal would look at various methods to remove noise, to remove interference. So you may apply some kind of frequency filtering or some band pass filtering to identify signals in the relevant band of interest. Feature extraction is very common in machine learning pipelines. You would like to reduce the dimensionality or you would like to select a relevant set of features that will help you build your classification pipeline. And finally, you have a classifier in the pipeline that recognizes these intents. So you may have offline training as initially what you will do is you will collect data from various users and you will train your classifier. And once you have trained the classifier, you will use it for online intent prediction. So when you have a live stream of EEG data, you will pre-process, extract features, and then use your trained classifier to get a prediction. And that is what you will use to control the device. So I hope that from the video, you are able to link what we are trying to show here, that entire pipeline for processing, feature extraction, and classification of the signals. So at this point, we'll review some of the approaches that are used, and then we'll try to motivate what we have proposed in that paper. So if you look at EEG data, as I said, there are various frequency bands of interest, right? There could be interest in motor movements. For example, you will use the beta band, which is in 8 to 30 Hertz. You may be interested in events of the eye movements, for example, blink or lateral eye movements. So in that case, you will filter signals in a lower frequency band of say 4 Hertz to 8 Hertz, which is the alpha band. So depending upon the kind of intent that you want to isolate from the signals, you will look at any frequency band from this set. So you will filter this data into multiple frequency bands if you are interested in different frequency bands. And you will apply what is called as common spatial pattern, which is a very common method applied to brain-computer interface signals. It is very similar to principal component analysis, where you find the eigenvalues and you project the data to the space spanned by important eigenvectors. So you will rank the eigenvectors in the order of decreasing eigenvalues and select some top set of eigenvectors to project the data. And in CSP, the additional step of data whitening is there, which is not commonly done in PCA, but there is the only difference between CSP and principal component analysis. It will help you reach a low dimensional space. Now, once you have this low dimensional space, you have features in different frequency bands and you need to aggregate them. So you will look at some feature selection methods because all of these features will not be important. Only some of them will be contributing to the intent that you want to identify. So you will do some feature selection to isolate the features or to select some features that you want. So in this paper that is from IGCNN, they have done sequential feature selection and rough set reduction to identify the features of interest. And then they build an ensemble of classifiers to find out what the user was trying to do or what was the user intent. And you will combine the predictions of all these different classifiers and finally rank how the model performs. So this is their pipeline where they are doing frequency filtering, CSP for feature selection or feature reduction. Then they are applying a feature selection approach to sequential feature selection. And finally, they are using an ensemble of classifiers to do the classification in the pipeline. Another variant of this was the subband common spatial patterns. Here, the only difference is that instead of doing the feature selection and an ensemble of classifiers, what they have done is that they have run classifiers on each of the individual frequency bands. And they have not done any feature selection at this stage. So here they have used different classifiers that are trained on features from each frequency band. And you combine the scores of these classifiers or the confidence scores and try to predict the outcome. So this approach is different from this, and we'll be comparing what we have proposed against these two approaches primarily on some benchmark data for this BCI for motor imagery. So let us look at what we were trying to build. So our approach is similar in the sense that we initially compute or filter the data using a bandpass filter in multiple frequency bands. This is common with what was already there. And then we also use common spatial patterns, which is similar to the existing pipeline for feature selection. So we reduce the dimensionality using common spatial patterns. And now for selection or for identifying the relevant set of features from the CSP features, we will be using classifiability, which is a method that was used in different contexts, but we will be motivating this for the use in our signal processing pipeline. And finally, we select the best frequency band using classifiability and use the twin support vector machine, which is robust to class imbalance for this specific scenario. So what we are trying to leverage here is one.
Sumit sir, please unmute yourself. Dr. Sumit.
Professor Sumit, you have been
Yeah,
muted. Could you kindly
sure.
unmute?
Okay, I hope it's okay now. So I was trying to explain that in our approach, what we had tried to do is we try to filter the data in multiple frequency bands. We use common spatial patterns for the dimensionality reduction. And for feature selection, we use classifiability, which is a method for selecting these features from the different CSP features. And finally, we train the classifier with the best frequency band. And the training model that we use is called as the twin support vector machine. So with the twin support vector machine, we are expecting better accuracy in the presence of class imbalance. And by using classifiability, it is a simple method to identify the features of interest from these different common spatial pattern reductions or for feature selection. And therefore, we are reducing the computational time in the entire pipeline. So now I move on to how exactly we built and what are the problems that we faced while we were trying to build this. So for feature selection, as I said, we have processed our EEG signals in different frequency bands in the 8 to 30 Hertz range because we are trying to detect movements. The common spatial pattern filter will extract discriminative features from the eigenspace of the EEG data. We want to identify which is the optimal band for that particular user, which has given us the best common spatial pattern features. So for doing this, we will be using classifiability, which determines how a feature set is robust compared to other features that are present without actually doing the classification. So without employing the classifier in the pipeline, we are trying to use classifiability for feature selection. So just to motivate how classifiability will work, let us say we have a simple data set where we have two classes that are shown here, and the points in pink are for one class and the points in blue are for the other class. So here in this distribution, you can see that the samples of one class are very closely present to each other, and samples of the other class are not overlapping with samples of one class. In this kind of a data set, if you compute classifiability, you will look at a space of the three-dimensional region where the third dimension is the label that you are interested in, and the two dimensions are your classes. So in this case, you will see that there is good separability between the label space in the label space for the data that you have, and therefore the classifiability score for this data set would be close to 1. On the other hand, if you look at a data set which is not very well separated, and you try to see this kind of a plot, you will see that this surface is very rough, or there are different peaks and crests in this surface. And therefore, for a non-separable data set, the classifiability value will be low and close to 0. So how we compute classifiability is what we'll discuss next. So given a set of points that are shown here, what we are trying to do is we will find out how many points are there in proximity of that of each point, and we will construct what is called a co-occurrence matrix. So for each point in the data set, whether it is of class A or class B, we will construct a corresponding co-occurrence matrix here, where each element in this co-occurrence matrix is the number of samples that are there for that class and the other class. So for example, if I look at a co-occurrence matrix for the point P11, which is this point, I will have 4 elements here. The first element will be how many points of that class are there in this circular region of P1. So I will see that there are 4 points here, so the value of this index is 4. The value of P12 will be the number of points of the other class that are in this region. So if you will see, there are 2 points of the other class, so that is shown as 2 here. Then the third element will be how many points of the same class are in the corresponding point of the other class. So I look at P1 of the other class, which is P1 minus 1, and in the proximity of this sample, I will see that how many points of the same class are here, which is 1, and the other class also I have 1 point. So these two elements are 1 and 1. So like this, I will be able to compute the co-occurrence matrix for all the samples in the data set. And the value of this function, so this distance function, I can threshold based on whether it is 1 if it is less than a user supplied threshold, and 0 if it is not, if it is less, and 1 if it is 1 if it is less, and 0 if it is greater. So basically this allows me to construct a proximity based mapping for each sample, and I add up all these co-occurrence matrices and get a normalized co-occurrence matrix for the entire data set. Once I have this, I will compute the difference between the sum of the diagonal and off diagonal elements, and basically whatever is the value that I get by this computation is what I call the classifiability. So just to look at how this will look at for 2 synthetic examples, let us say you have this kind of a data set and you have samples of class 1 which are clearly above the x-axis and samples of class -1 which are below, and you try to compute the classifiability from here for various values of the neighborhood distance. So what we were talking about in the previous slide, this distance, if I keep changing, that is a parameter in this computation. And you can see that if the data set is well separated, whatever neighborhood distance that I may use, the value of classifiability will usually be higher. So I mean, the value will, for example, for higher values, it will tend close to 0, but for lower values, it will be close to 1. So this is the case for a separable data set, no matter how far I vary the distance or the R parameter of the computation. But on the other hand, if it is a distributed, so not well separated data set, for example here, no matter what value of D I choose, the value of classifiability will continue to be low. It will not go close to 1 for most values of D. So therefore, for a given data set or for a given feature set, if I use this kind of a metric where I change the value of neighborhood distance and see how the classifiability varies, if it is well separated, it will be close to 1 for lower values of D. But if it is not well separated, you will see that it will tend close to, it will always remain less than 0.5, or at least have a lower side of the values for different values of the neighborhood distance. So therefore, we can use this as a metric for doing feature set selection. And once we have identified the feature set that is of interest, we now want to identify what kind of classification or what kind of classifier we want to employ in the pipeline to detect the approach. So classically, we all are aware that the support vector machine is commonly used, which constructs a maximum margin classifier for a given set of samples, and it solves this kind of an optimization problem where what we are trying to do is we are trying to minimize the norm of the weight vector of this hyperplane. And there are slack variables which are controlled by a parameter C. And we are saying that the plane should be at least unit distance away from samples of both classes. So we identify support vectors and the plane is at least unit distance away. In the soft margin version, we say that according to these slack variables, we may have a tolerance that can be allowed for the unit distance that we are talking about. So this distance being greater than 1, we try to compensate it by a slack variable epsilon for each of these samples in this optimization problem. So the classical SVM, the problem is in case there is imbalance in the data. So for example, if you look at this data set, there are fewer points of blue and the number of samples of the red class are larger. So if you train an SVM on this kind of data, they will be biased towards samples of the majority class. And because of this bias, you can see that the plane is closer to samples of the majority class, due to which it will tend to be more favorable towards samples of the majority class. And therefore, if you use a one versus rest approach for building such a classifier, you will have bias in the classifier. So you will not get correct predictions if the data set that you trained on was imbalanced. And as I explained before, in this BCI kind of pipeline, it is very likely that there will be imbalance in this. So what we alternatively suggest is that we say we build the twin SVM. So what is different here that we are trying to do is that instead of finding that one plane which separates, we say that we solve for two non-parallel hyperplanes. So you can see that now the model is different. We will find two planes, one of which is the blue plane and one is the red one. The blue plane will be close to samples of one class and at least unit distance away from samples of the other class, while the red plane will be closer to samples of the other class and unit distance away from these set of samples. So this way we have two optimization problems to solve. But the good part is that we are solving smaller sized optimization problems, because here what will happen is you will have to run it for all samples of the data set. It is not specific to a particular class. But here the number of constraints that we have are only for samples of the other class. And in the objective function, we try to minimize the distance of the plane from samples of that class itself. And we try to solve these two quadratic problems, and the model that we eventually get is what is called the twin support vector machine. This has been widely used in literature and it has been fairly around. It's a paper from the Transactions on Neural Networks and Learning Systems. And we have tried to use that in this machine learning pipeline for brain-computer interfaces. So this kind of a twin support vector machine model will, what will happen is now you are finding two planes and both of these are close to samples of each class. When you want to get a prediction, you will compute the distance of a point from this plane and from this plane. You will check whichever it is closer to, you will assign the point to that corresponding class. So what you have alleviated here compared to what we had previously was that there is no bias, in the sense now each plane represents the proximity to the individual class, and therefore the tendency of bias towards majority class is much lower in case of using the twin support vector machine than if we had used the conventional support vector machine. And of course, you can always, as it is with the support vector machine, you can also derive the dual for the twin support vector machine and solve it for the kernel case. Therefore, this computation I am not covering in this lecture, but we can always go back to the paper and look at how to derive the dual. And similar to the normal SVM dual, you can also have the twin support vector machine dual and simplify the computations and also use the kernel mapping. So this kind of formulation is what has been employed in the twin support vector machine that has been used instead of the primal. So this is similar to what is already being done for support vector machines as well. So what are the advantages that we got by using this twin SVM? One is that now we have non-parallel hyperplanes. So each plane can go close to samples of its own class, and therefore there is better generalization that is expected. There is multi-class classification. In the presence of imbalance, there will not be bias towards samples of the majority class. And now we are solving two smaller size quadratic problems. So compared to the earlier case where we had a large quadratic problem to solve, we have smaller quadratic problems, although we are solving two. But the specific advantage that we obtain due to the nature of this formulation for this imbalanced data, that is what helps us use these, leverage the benefit of solving these smaller size problems. So coming to summarize what we have been discussing so far in these slides, we have an input data set, which is our EEG signal. We have filtered it in different frequency bands and computed the common spatial pattern features. We now compute classifiability of each set of common spatial pattern features. and we select the class feature or the feature set from the frequency band which has the highest value of classifiability. Basically, we are trying to say that for that specific user, what we have selected will be the best frequency band for the signals, and then we will use a twin support vector machine classifier for building a robust classifier in the presence of imbalance. And therefore, by this entire pipeline of feature selection using classifiability and using twin support vector machine for classification, we have built this pipeline for EEG signal processing. Now we'll look at results on some benchmark data sets where we evaluated this approach and compared them with some of the approaches that we had discussed before. So as I said, we have filter bank common spatial pattern, the bispectrum approach, or the data-driven frequency band selection approach in these papers. And what we have got using our approach in terms of percentage improvement is what is shown. So we have two sets of data sets. One was the data set that looked at the competition 4, which is a 2-class motor imagery paradigm. So it is only trying to classify between left and right. And then there was BCI competition 3, in which there is data for left and right, and for 4-class data where we are trying to do classification of left, right hand movements and foot and tongue movements. So these are the 4 classes of interest. And using this multi-class setting, even in this case, we are getting a 34% improvement over what was already reported in these papers. So what we are trying to show here is that we have different kinds of approaches, but if we employ this kind of feature selection and classification using twin support vector machine, there is improvement in terms of comparison with the baseline approach. And we also look at specific results. So for example, on the BCI competition 4 data set, you have data of 9 subjects or 9 users, and each of them have performed 3 sections, right? 3 sessions. So in each session, what we have done is we have tried to find out what are the frequency bands that are best for this subject and what is the accuracy that we obtain in terms of mean plus minus standard deviation across the 5 folds. So we have done k-fold validation and presented our results. And in the last few columns, these are the kappa values, which are typically computed for these kind of experiments instead of looking at accuracy. So this is kind of should be close to 1 for better performance. And we can see that for different subjects, the kappa value is different. And on an average, we do 0.52, but for some subjects, we have very good performance, 0.72, 0.89. And this is kind of shows that even though compared to better approaches, these are all averaged values across the different sessions, right? And this is the best value that we have. So we can see, for example, here in 2 cases, we are getting very good performance compared to the other models or the other approaches. And so there is a lot of variability. And although that problem has not been completely addressed, but still there is improvement compared to what was state of the art. So this is where we present some results on 2-class motor imagery classification. And there are also cases where we look at 4 classes. As I was talking about, one of the BCI data sets has 4 classes. So we look at left hand, right hand, foot and tongue movements, and we classify all of these against rest. So there are 2 subjects in this data set, and with the twin SVM, we get higher accuracies compared to what we get with a normal support vector machine. And even the frequency band that we select, so we look at specific frequency band that is of interest to the user or in which the user is able to replicate these movements well. And therefore, you can see that this is also different for different classes. So this motivates the need to build these custom models for users so that they can actually able to use this instead of building one large model which is trained on a lot of data. So for these kind of systems, it is very important that performance is critical. We should not be making errors when prediction, because the system, when it is used in a practical setting, it will cause problems. So therefore, we need to build these custom models that will be able to identify the best frequency band and also give the best predictions on the intents that you have. So that was the motivation why we use the twin support vector machine for this EEG classification pipeline. So even in terms of computation time, you can see that we need to compare how much time the individual components in the pipeline take. And so we have additionally introduced classifiability for feature selection, right? That was not there in the existing pipeline. So if you compare this and what we have done, we have introduced classifiability after common spatial pattern and only using the twin SVM. So we have sort of alleviated these 2 blocks. And even in terms of profile time that we look in a simulation environment, we compare our approach takes 37 seconds to train on the data that we have compared to the baseline approaches that take around 90 seconds. So even in terms of time, we are doing better than the classical approach. More so because we have eliminated the time that was taken in feature selection here. We are using classifiability, and even for the multiple classifiers they are using here, we are using a twin SVM which solves smaller size problems. So that is a better advantage in terms of computation time. So this is what we see in terms of time on the results that we had. So this was the first part of the talk where we were trying to look at EEG signals for brain-machine interfaces. And in the second part, we looked at signals or a system that has been built using the surface electromyogram. And this was something we presented in the SMC conference in 2016. And this is joint work with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and IIT at that point of time. So before I move in, if there are any questions, I can take some of them now. And towards the end, we will always leave time for more questions if there are. Yes.
Which device have used for application?
Good morning, sir.
So I couldn't hear much of that. If you could please.
Good morning, sir.
I will request to raise the hand. I will request those who wish to ask any questions, they can raise their hand. Yes, Vikhyat Mehra, please put up the question.
Good morning, sir. Sir, how we can implement these things at a beginner level?
So for some of these aspects, you will find that code is available and data sets are available publicly. So if you look at EEG data sets, you will find a lot of them that are available on open data sets for different kind of tasks, right? So motor imagery, hand-foot movement, there is data set for EEG, which subjects are looking at the MNIST data set, for example. So there are lots of data sets available publicly. So even if you don't have hardware to acquire the signals, you can look at public data sets to start with. And in terms of computation or building these pipelines, there are open source tools that are available. So you can look at OpenBCI, you can look at BCI 2000, you can look at OpenVibe, which is OpenVibe. These are all open source software that are available for processing signals. And currently even Python based tools are also available for building BCI based pipelines. I'm not sure if it's called PyBCI or PyEG, but do look it up. So these kind of tools will provide implementations for building the entire pipeline. So you can use some Java programming for the front end, and for all the signal processing and machine learning, you could use either Python or Octave or MATLAB based interfaces, and you could build this pipeline. So you could take up data sets which are publicly available. Most of the code that I have talked about for this is already available on GitHub. You can look it up or even send me an email. I'll share the code repository if you're interested. And there are also a lot of open source tools that you can look at for building these kind of systems end to end. So that I hope will answer your question.
And sir, at our level, at a beginner level, which hardware we can use?
So OpenBCI, if you look at the website, it now has individual components that you can purchase. So you can purchase the electrodes, you can purchase the amplifier, and you can assemble and do it on your own. In terms of commercial hardware, there are a lot of options available in the market. So Emotive, NeuroSky, GTech, a lot of companies manufacture hardware equipment with the kind that I was showing you. So they have licenses as well, and they will be slightly higher on the cost end. But for exploration, they do provide trial APIs. I'm not sure. Some of them at least provide trial APIs for students and academic institutions. So look up their websites. You would be able to get these devices. They have various models and different kinds of configuration depending on the number of electrodes and the number of the resolution that you want to take. So accordingly, you could look at which kind of device you want to buy, whether it is a single channel device or a 16 channel device, based on what you want to do for this.
But sir, BCI devices are quite expensive. So is there any alternative of that?
So one option that I would suggest is you look at OpenBCI. OpenBCI is reasonable. And in fact, if you are able to, I mean, what we did when we were doing this is we worked in collaboration with the hospital. So we went to the neurology department of NIMS, and we also worked with other medical institutions so that they can help us with the hardware and the signal part. So they would typically have EEG labs where there are a lot of patients whose EEG they are recording. So if you can do it collaboratively with them, that will sort of help you on getting a good resolution or high resolution data. And also you will have clinical expertise from neuroscience, neurotechnicians or neurologists at these hospitals. So that way it is a good pipeline to both collect the data and to implement the system that you have built. And you could also look at how to make it more cost effective for practical ground level usage. So that is something I would suggest, if cost is primarily the limitation that you face.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr. Sumit. We have also at MET have a MOU with hospitals such as Ram Manohar Institute, and students are and PhD scholars are working in this area. And here in your lecture, the audience are from BTech second year to MTech students, PhD scholars, and the faculty members. So please address so that BTech students may also be feel interested to work in this particular area.
Sure. So thanks. So that is a please go ahead.
We have next Dr. Chandresh Jain. Want to put his question?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, sir. I think it's a very interesting talk. And my question is basically related with the feature selection procedures. How do you ensure that there is a no or almost nil information loss without losing the important features, because the features role is very important in the classification and coming out in the actual clinically related inferences. So what is your comment on this questions?
Okay. So that's a very valid question, and that is one of the primary challenges we face when we are doing feature selection or feature selection. So there are two ways of validating what we are doing. One is that we validate it from the mathematical or the approach that we are employing, and that will mostly, for example, if you're using mutual information based features or you are using principal component analysis kind of projection, you can have ways to check it in terms of the loss that you are suffering by the projection. Those are measurable by various metrics. For example, mutual information, or if you look at how much eigenvalues are retaining the spectrum of the, in terms of the spectrum of the eigenvalues if you compute, how much variance you are retaining. Those kind of measures you can look at from signal processing point of view. But more importantly, for building practical systems, what we felt in our experience also was that we used to look at these visualization or scalp maps and share them with neurologists or our clinical people whom we used to collaborate with. So that way, what the additional benefit was, for them, it is easier to understand if you have a scalp map. For example, this kind of map that I was showing in the beginning, if we those for the clinicians and have them for users, that is very highly beneficial in understanding what is going on and how we can, whether our pipeline is working correctly.
So is it your suggestion probably to incorporate with a clinician, suitable person who can really pick out and who can really help out to discuss about the importance of those features which we are going to take for the classification procedures?
Yes. So based on our experience, I would suggest that that is perhaps the best way to go about it when we are trying to build systems that the neurologists will be better people to try and interpret these for you, and they will help much better guide how the course of development of the pipeline. So in my experience also, it was very beneficial to work with neurologists or neurotechnicians in visualization.
Yeah. Sir, my second question, my this in conclusion, the second question, from where we can really get the publicly available the clinical data, which is approved and acceptable as a benchmark data, clinically accepted.
So in terms of data, the main thing is you have data from two different kinds of hardware. One is commercial hardware and one is clinical grade hardware. So clinical grade hardware has high resolution, so it is maybe 128 channels or 64 channels. That is high resolution EEG data. You can find websites which have hosted these data, and there are a lot of websites which are related, for example, to BCI competition. I could share some of the links if you could send me an email. I will share across the links.
Okay, sure.
OpenEEG has a platform for a lot of these kinds of signals. So, in the terms of validity, see, most of the signals that are available publicly are clean signals that have been processed in an environment and are being provided. If you look at actual data from hospitals, you will, from actual patients, you will face more challenges. Of course, this is for an initial benchmarking of your approach. But when you're actually building systems, you would need to look at data from a hospital which has collected from standardized devices, and there are standard file formats for these data.
Yes.
That in some way ensures standardization. So towards the end of the talk, I'll also talk about standardization, which is an emerging aspect.
Okay.
I'll address some of your topics like that.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions?
We have Dr.
Sumit, I
Vijay.
have one question.
Yeah, please go.
You have collected the data in the AIMS lab. Where you have collected or which device you have used to collect the EEG data?
Okay, so
what is its tolerance basically?
Okay, so
noise tolerance.
Sure. So the data that is shown in this work, so this paper that we have, that is from the BCI competition, which is organized by TU Graz in Austria. So they have posted it publicly on the websites for various BCI competitions, and you can find that website very openly online. It is used as a benchmark in a lot of papers. So BCI competition data, they have different data sets, and let me just take you to
Means
that.
you have not collected the EEG data. You have just taken the data from online data.
So for this paper, yes, and the video that I was showing you before, that is data from the Emotiv headset. Emotiv headset has a 14-channel headset with the resolution of 128 Hertz, and the tolerance on the bands, I mean, you actually have to tune it. So when you wear that headset, there is an initial calibration procedure where you have to bring down the noise levels or the threshold levels by using saline solution on the electrodes. So you have to bring it below that level by setting the electrodes appropriately, and then you do the recording. That was for the actual system that we built. For the paper, the results are from publicly available data.
Thank you.
Sure.
We will continue with the lecture because we are running
Can you
out.
suggest one filter, bandpass filter? Yeah. One more question I have.
Please go ahead.
Can you suggest any device for the bandpass filter which you have designed 8 to 13 Hertz?
So the bandpass filter is a software filter. It is not a hardware filter. The device itself does filtering. So Emotiv, for example, if you take, Emotiv will filter your data in the 50 Hertz band, in the less than, 4 to 50 Hertz band filtered data you can get. And if you use their API, or if you use, for example, their...
But in case of the Emotiv, Emotiv not giving the accurate data.
So
I have seen in biomedical center in the IIT, we have used the Emotiv device that is not giving the proper data, EEG data.
Okay.
Even it having the limitation of the channel.
Yes. So
3 or 4 channels we can use only in case of the Emotiv.
So that is a restriction with Emotiv. So you have, if you look at more devices like NeuroSky, you have fewer number of channels. So the question is what you want to use Emotiv for. So we also started with Emotiv when we started this work. Initially, we started with Emotiv headset. Now, our limitation was that we couldn't build a robust motor imagery pipeline using Emotiv because these electrodes are not in the cortical region. Emotiv's electrodes are largely in the frontal and occipital and parietal lobes. So one way, we had written a paper also about that, is that you could re-engineer, you could sort of do flexibility in the electrodes that were available in Emotiv, or you could actually look at building your custom hardware. So at that point when we were doing it, the OpenBCI and all were not so developed, and we didn't have various options with respect to hardware. Now, of course, there are more options in terms of building custom hardware components. But to answer your question, if you are working with Emotiv, you should only look at identifying those intents that Emotiv is good at. So if you look at the Emotiv cognitive suite and expressive suite, they have a set of algorithms that they build to classify, right? So you should also look at similar intents. If you want to build a system using those kind of intents, Emotiv would be the best choice. But if you want to build something that is different from those set of intents, the data that you get will not be the best data that you get from Emotiv. So you'll have to look at alternative sources that give you good electrodes at the good locations that you want, that are of interest in your pipeline, and accordingly use that data to build the system. That is what I would suggest.
Okay, sir. You
Okay,
please
thank you.
continue with the lecture. We will take up the rest of the questions after your lecture.
Okay, so this part is short. This is similar to what we were doing, but this is for electromyogram or surface electromyogram signals. So this is for a prosthetic limb control where we are trying to get signals from the muscular activity, and patients who have paralyzed limbs are actually trying to use this kind of a device, and we need to build a pipeline to control this prosthetic limb. So you can see here, for example, we collect signals from 4 channels. This is something that we had a restriction in place, and this is the kind of setup that we had. And we had to work with data from 4 channels, and we wanted to build a system that would be able to detect these classes of movement, right? So 16 classes of finger movement that are shown here. This is what we want to detect from the 4 channel data that we had from the surface electromyogram. And you can see that some of these movements are of individual fingers or individual limbs, while some of these are coupled or complex movements. For example, wrist flexion is a complex movement, wrist extension, pinch, grasp, these are all complex movements, while the initial set of movements are movements of the single fingers. So to build this pipeline, what we did is we had these signals from 9 subjects, 8 healthy people, 1 amputee volunteer, and the gender distribution was 6 males and 2 female patients. Average age, you can see height, and these are primarily information about the data set that we used. And there was no history in terms of myopathic or neuropathologic notable components, but primarily they had 1 amputee volunteer in this study. We conducted recordings with sessions lasting around 50 seconds. Initial 5 seconds was an adaptation period. For each trial, we collected data for 10 seconds. 2.5 seconds was the transition time for onset. After that, the subject was shown this movement to replicate on a screen, and he repeated that movement for 5 seconds. And after doing it for 5 seconds, the final 2.5 seconds were relaxation or post-task execution period, rest period. And during this, during this 5 seconds of the trial duration, the subjects repeatedly performed this movement. And we recorded 2 sessions per subject per task, where task is the different kind of intents that I was showing on the previous slide. So we had 40 trials per task in our data set. So with this data set that is, for example, shown here from the different channels that we have a region in which we want to isolate this trial and then look at signal processing, feature extraction, and classification methods. So this study, we did not do too much of feature engineering in the space. We simply used RMS values in the channels, and our basic objective here was to show that the twin SVM is beneficial in presence of imbalance. The basic challenge that you will see in the pipeline that we had is that we had to classify these different this 16 different classes of intent, and this was a very highly unbalanced data set. So we didn't largely look at feature engineering, but we looked at how to build robust classifiers in this setting. So in terms of the pipeline, as said, that we'll primarily be using the twin SVM for classification and comparing it with the libSVM or the conventional standard SVM implementation. And on various subjects for the different categories of movements, we will see that these are the mean and standard deviation values. And you would see that there is improvement compared to the standard SVM for these different movement flexions or extension movements. And more importantly, subject-wise, if you look at it, so we had 9 subjects, and you would see that overall for these different classes, the level of accuracies that we could get using the twin support vector machine was higher than what we had for the libSVM. And these results are also statistically compared in terms of p-value. So the conclusion with the twin SVM that we primarily want to look at in this talk was with reference to EEG data and surface electromyogram data, and how we can build systems for these kind of pipelines or workflows that we want. So I also wanted to, before ending, talk about some emerging directions or current directions that are of interest. And there I'll cover a couple of new things. One is the twin support vector machine in a neural network kind of model, sparse learning machine using minimal complexity machines, and I will also talk about IEEE standardization. So one of the things that we tried to build in our recent paper was a sparse neural network using twin kind of motivation. So compared to conventional feed-forward neural networks, what we are doing is we are solving different kind of objective functions for the individual networks, and each network we are trying to train it so that it is the weights that you get are close to individual class representations. So motivated by the philosophy of twin SVM, we have extended this to twin neural networks. This is one of the papers that has appeared in IJCNN, but there is also another detailed paper in an Elsevier journal for the twin neural networks. I am not going into details of this, but this may also be of interest considering the fact that currently deep learning methods and larger networks are very significantly involved in these kinds of pipelines. So I encourage you to look these up if these are of interest, and I believe the code is also available on Git. More importantly, what is of interest, as was also being asked in a question, is the development of standards. So in terms of the IEEE, there are a couple of working groups that are looking at building standards for BCI systems. And there is an article that we had put in the IEEE Brain newsletter recently, where we are trying to identify what are the areas where we need standardization for these systems. So this is a community of users which is interested in trying to build standards for these kind of data so that there is interoperability, and we can build practical systems for users for various consumer segments. So what this group is looking at is, you can look at this article as well. We had conducted an initial survey. This had started in around 2018 or 19, I think. And now we are looking at drafting the IEEE standards for these kind of data. So initially we looked at what kind of domains are there where people are interested in building standards for these kinds of systems. And this slide, this part of the infographic basically shows the results of a survey that was conducted initially. And we realized that there are a lot of domains where there is need for standardization of these biosignals. And because there are different formats, different devices, and different applications, there is a need for development of common standards for these BCI systems. So for example, we are looking at sensing technologies now where we have these different modalities, different signal formats, and we need standardized representations for allowing interoperability on different sensing technologies. We are looking at how data should be represented and stored. So data representation, storing, and sharing subgroup was the group that I was largely responsible for in this IEEE initiative. And we are looking at compressed file formats for EEG signals and various other initiatives that have been taken in the open source community. And if we can recommend guidelines for how these systems should be built and how the biosignal should be stored and shared between devices. Even in terms of the end effectors or the actuators, we are looking at prosthetic exoskeletons and VR neurostimulation pipelines as to how the entire processing pipeline should result in end user actuation and how feedback should be collected. So you would have also seen systems that take feedback from the user and re-stimulate the entire pipeline, stimulate the brain back again. So you would have seen perhaps in the news that there was a study to allow a blind person to sort of see a visualization of an object by re-stimulating the occipital region of the brain from stimulus that has been collected by the response of that person through EEG. So those kind of pipelines where we are looking at feedback, we look at end effectors, user needs. So you could see that different kinds of users have different needs. So one of these is of course in the space of building assistive technology where a lot of people with disabilities would tend to use these systems. But in addition, there is also scope in the consumer segment in ergonomic human factors, portability, safety, privacy of these devices. These are some of the aspects which we are trying to address in the user needs segment. And of course, performance assessment and benchmarking is a very open topic. We typically tend to look at classification accuracy and various measures around that. But more recently, we have started to look at user-centric measures, and those are of more interest as these systems continue to be built for a large number of users with various levels of sophistication and different use cases. So moving forward, this IEEE working groups will look at building standards that revolve around these domains. And we always welcome people who are interested in contributing to these IEEE initiatives to join these working groups and be part of the discussions there so that they can also contribute to building these standards and contributing towards these directions going forward. So I briefly wanted to talk about this in the last 5 minutes, and that is sort of where I end my talk. So I think we can go back to questions or any further discussion that you may want. If there are any questions, I can take them now.
I guess we have a question from Mr. Parth Joshi.
Good morning. So I would like to ask, like you were telling us about the hardware systems, and for the data set, yeah, we can take the data sets from the online sources. But what if we want to manufacture the hardware system on a undergraduate level? So how much time would it be requiring? Like for example, if we start a project on this, uh, how much input will it be requiring to make a EEG headset?
Okay, so we had done one experiment with a couple of students when I was at CDAC, where we tried to use some hardware that we already had purchased initially, but we tried to build a pipeline using Arduino for the board and get the signals from the device on a board. So currently, in terms of time, I would say it depends on our experience level with these different platforms. So if you have good experience with building a basic sensor and interfacing it on a board, for example, Arduino or any other boards that you may tend to use commonly, and relaying these onto a port on a software port, you will be able to get the data from the signals. The main challenge is that you should get good data, because if the signals or the sensors that you build should be of good quality and should have high fidelity and low tolerance to noise. So if you have good sensors, you will be able to build a starting acquisition device that will allow you to look at data. So once this is not very complicated, it is something that is doable based on current resources that are available online, and it is up to you how exactly you want to do it. Whether you may choose to buy some components or you may choose to build components from scratch, that is up to you. But the key challenge is what you want to build it for and how you will be able to use it. So that is where you will face challenges. So even though you will be able to use a sensor to collect data and be able to analyze the time series data over a port onto your software application, but the challenge that you will face will be in the kind of intent that you wish to identify, what you want to build. So to give you an example, for example, if you close your eyes and you collect signals from occipital region, there is a very good frequency alpha rhythm that is formed. So if you look at, if you filter the signals in 4 to 8 hertz in the occipital region, you will find very synchronous waves that you get. So this is one common way in which these signals are benchmarked, that your hardware is correctly functioning and you do not have any discrepancies in the signal that you get. So once you have done these kind of validations, then you look at building a pipeline using something else, for example, eye movements or motor movements or something like that. So the entire pipeline will be challenging in terms of the individual components if you want to build all of them on your own. But it will be a learning experience, because as you go ahead, you will realize what works and what may not, and therefore you may want to change the individual components in terms of the task or the processing pipeline. This is still an active area of research, and according to what you want to build, it will change according to that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Would we be having any more questions? Yes, Mr. Nigam. Mr. Ajit Prakash Nigam, you raised your hand. Do you have any questions to ask him, sir? So I guess we do not have any more questions.
I would like to ask one question.
Sure.
So, sir, for example, if there is this research going on the topic emotion recognition using EEG. So, for that, should we be making the algorithms on Python, or we should be going for the MATLAB? Because I'm not sure which software we should be using on for the interface part.
So this is a very common question. Where you use Python is where you want an open source pipeline and you have issues with licensing on the solution that you want to make. So if it is for an initial evaluation or a pilot study or in an academic environment where you have the license for MATLAB and you can use it, you can go with MATLAB. There is ways to interface acquisition devices with MATLAB using OpenVibe and using BCI 2000. So that is not a problem. But if you would like a case where you have issues with MATLAB in terms of licensing, go ahead and build a Python pipeline. It will integrate as easily.
MATLAB is also available.
So then the choice is yours. Then it's, MATLAB will be, if you want to install the MATLAB instance on your compute node, it will be more heavy compared to Python.
Already done.
Sorry?
Already done, sir. The MATLAB is already installed. I'm just asking which interface would be much more easy for the machine part, like when we are interfacing with the hardware.
So from the hardware point of view, you need driver support. Okay, so for example, if you look at OpenVibe, it has acquisition servers for different devices. So depending on the kind of device that you have, it also has a raw driver for a port where it will simply relay whatever data is being fed to it if you make your own device. And if you these devices such as Emotive or NeuroSky, then they have independent drivers for them. You can select that driver, and that is a component based in Qt as a programming language, and so it is based on a Visual Studio kind of framework. You will get an executable in Windows, so you do not need to worry about the backend of that, but that will help you interface with different devices and get the signal from there. After that, you can build using Python, you can build using MATLAB, up to you.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions for sir? So I don't suppose anybody else has more questions. So may I request you to please paste your mail ID in the chat box. So just in case the participants may want to contact you regarding their queries, they may mail you with their respective queries and get the solutions.
I'm not sure I have access to the chat window, but
Yeah, ma'am. We don't have the access to chat window.
anyways,
No issue. I will paste the email ID of Dr.
Yes.
Soham.
Surely, sir. So that way we may help our respective participants to come in contact with sir and get their queries cleared. Thank you so much, Dr. Suman sir, for such an intriguing and interesting lecture on the upcoming technologies. May I now request our esteemed Professor Dr. K.K. Singh sir, Assistant Professor and Student Branch Counselor of IEEE Amity University, Uttar Pradesh, Lucknow campus for the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sumit, for this wonderful talk. Very nice talk, very informative. I hope from BTech to PhD scholars to the faculty members, everyone is really thrilled and enjoyed your talk. I'm having so many messages in my chat box. So it was a wonderful talk and a nice area to work for those who have not still started their working. And we have a great person like Sumit, who has a wonderful experience in this particular area of machine learning, and he has shared his paper, he has shared his ideas. Yes, also briefed you all with the areas where we can work together. And I would like to thank Dr. Sumit for sparing his time. I would also like to thank Dr. Varun, my teammate from Young Professional Committee, all my branch members of AUP Lucknow, especially Ravi, Hanit, Saurabh, who have put their effort to organize this lecture series. All the faculty members from different institutes who have joined here. The students from different branches of engineering, the PhD scholars, the master's student. Thank you very much everyone for joining. And tomorrow again we will have another lecture at same time on the same platform by Dr. Soman from IIT. Thank you very much everyone, and before leaving I will request everyone to please switch on their camera so that we can have a group photograph as a memory. I will request everyone to switch on their cameras.
सर इसमें केवल कुछ ही लोगों की फोटो आ रही है, तो मेरे ख्याल से सेटिंग में जाके गैलरी व्यू या लार्ज गैलरी में मेरे ख्याल से सभी आ जाएंगे.
Sir, I have selected large gallery and it is visible at my end.
Okay.
I will, yes.
हो गया.
Yes, we are ready. You all can cheer up. You can have a photograph. You can take the screenshot also. Thank you one and all present here. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Sumit.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, esteemed members. Sir, may we conclude the meeting now?
Yes, Anil. You can conclude. Thank you.